Welcome back, everyone, to the Asheville Vedic Astrology YouTube channel. We're here once again with Charlotte Benson. This is part 2 of a 2-part series where we discuss the outer planets. Charlotte has practiced astrology full-time professionally since 1972. She has analyzed tens of thousands of charts, serving her clients with the intelligence offered by the language of the stars. Charlotte has been the president of the American College of Vedic Astrology since 2018. In this part of our discussion, Charlotte and I discuss the influence of the outer planets through particular houses within the chart with a focus on relationships. If you didn't catch the last video, I'd highly recommend it. We talked about the outer planets and the fundamentals of the outer planets as they relate to Vedic astrology. And actually, let me do that again because I just tripped over relate. Right. All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the Asheville Vedic Astrology YouTube channel. I'm here once again with Charlotte Benson. And if you missed our last video, we talked about the outer planets and how they relate to Vedic astrology. And in this section, we're going to discuss how the outer planets work with your natal chart, a little more specifically, and also relationships. So welcome back, Charlotte.
Well, thank you, Ryan. It's very nice to be back with you again.
Yeah, good to see you again. So we've already talked a lot about the outer planets, and you gave fantastic information. What I'd like to do is maybe spend a little bit of time reflecting on how you have seen Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, how they have impacted certain aspects of the natal chart, you know, when it's with Jupiter or maybe with Mercury. So in your experience, what have you seen with the way these planets interact?
Oh my goodness. Well, I have a lot to say about that, but
yeah, just pick one or two and we can go with it.
Okay. Well, I think it might make sense to start with again, just because of the sequence of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, let's start with the influence of Uranus, because this can be so shocking and so startling that you can't miss this Uranus situation.
Okay.
But again, since obviously we don't have access to those outer planets are not in the dasha sequences. They sort of they exist as an independent ingredient, I would say, in the proceedings. So most of my practice is associated with the future. I mean, or the present and the future. So for instance, well, I'll just offer this as a practical note. Right now, the planet Uranus is in Mesha, is in Aries at the moment. Until, though, the big news is that in June, Uranus moves into Vrishabha, into Taurus. So this is, I mean, you know, Uranus stays in a sign for 7 or 7.5 years. So this will be relevant for people with planets in Taurus. I'm getting ahead of myself. You know, Uranus is still in Aries. So whatever planet's being, especially if you have an inner planet in Aries, as I say to my clients, you will not be bored. So what the influence again? All right. So let's just start from the beginning. If Uranus is running over your ascendant, or your lagna or your lagna lord, then again you're reinventing yourself. Now, I hope that doesn't sound like a cliche, but that is really literally what is going on. The message of Uranus is to throw off the mind-forged manacles of the past and go into the unknown future. Of course, the future is unknown, but it says take a leap of faith or experiment. I mentioned that in our last conversation, that I suggest that people adopt the sort of the mantle of being the mad scientist. Just, well, let's experiment, see what happens. Right. I mean, I'm not saying see what happens by investing your next nest egg in cryptocurrency.
Right.
I mean, one must use one's common sense here. But the idea with Uranus, always the baseline with Uranus is liberation. And as the Japanese Buddhists say, it's Hoshaku Kempan, the exhibition of the true self. Not that you've had an inauthentic self previously, but anyway, you know, anything that does not serve the future is going to be left behind in a quite abrupt way. Uranus is the planet of electricity. So it can be quite shocking. And this can be, you know, this is not a transformation. Nothing is morphing here. It's like a Shazam Shaktipat moment.
Right.
So whatever the principles are represented by any planet that's being visited by Uranus, you can make a very simple sentence about anything.
Mhm.
Okay, so Uranus is on your ascendant, and so your personality can become more eccentric. You can be as bad as you want to be, or there could be some physical changes there. If it crosses your moon, well, things get really interesting when Uranus crosses your moon, because then, well, every karakatwa of the moon is revolutionized quite suddenly, often through the agency of a friendly stranger who just shows up for a moment, rattles your cage, and then moves on.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Well, my intention is to be useful by being specific as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so when it crosses over Mercury, you change your mind or your mode of expression, or you're opening up new neural pathways.
Right.
Uh, I mean, literally, you're leaping over several stages of evolution. When you're contacted by Uranus, you leap over several stages of evolution. Let me put it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
This is sudden. And then Venus, well, that the danger there is, or that'll be fun. Those two planets, I think they operate really well together.
Uh,
The danger to the married is evident, but it's stimulating in new creative ways.
yeah. So it's
When
just,
you're
just shaking up whatever it passes over. It's just inducing significant change by bringing in like new ideas. It's like, for example, Venus and marriage and these kinds of things.
That's right.
Yeah.
Uranus does represent a thought whose time has come.
Okay.
Uranus represents the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times,
Okay.
and again, its motivation is liberation.
Right. Yeah. Got it.
So there's lots of different combinations there. I'm not sure, Ryan, whether you want me to just touch on every single planet or.
No, I think this is good because what I was kind of hoping to get is just a general idea of
Mhm.
when these outer planets hit one of the natal planets, what happens. And so the examples you gave, like with the moon, Venus, are fantastic. And I think people, at least who pay attention to channels like this, know enough about the other planets to then kind of put the rest of it together. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that could turn out to be quite a long conversation, but for excuse me, but so Uranus has just to keep this in context, I would say that Uranus would only make a contact to any given planet approximately every 21 years.
Right.
That would be a fourth house or a 10th house aspect from Uranus every 21 years. So it's rare, it's impactful. This is not business as usual when Uranus shows up.
So when you're talking about, that's a good point that you made there. When you're talking about contact with it, you're not just talking about a direct conjunction. You're also talking about aspects from.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Typically, oh yes, but speaking of aspects, that's very important. We have to narrow down our focus, I think. Yes,
Right.
conjunctions are prime,
Mhm.
but a quarter cycle of Uranus is about 21 years.
Mhm.
Um, if Uranus is throwing a ninth house aspect onto its place, there's not much to report there.
Mhm.
But again, a 90 degree or a 270-degree aspect, a fourth house or a 10th house aspect, you feel that.
Right.
One feels that, I'm thinking.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. That's good to know. I'm really glad that you pointed out the degrees of the aspects because I think a lot of people sometimes just sort of focus on, well, if it's in the fourth or the 10th, and they don't necessarily get very specific into, well, it's actually the degree. It does make a difference in the house, but the degree is what's going to show when it's going to really get you.
Well, that's right, because, for instance, Uranus stays in the sign for 7 years. So there may be an ongoing theme associated with the bhava that it transits.
Right.
Yes, I mean, in fact, there will be. I didn't mean there may be, there is.
Yeah.
But in terms of the specific, event timeline, it's really confined to, a couple of degrees on
Yeah.
either side.
Okay. And then Neptune, when you see Neptune hit, like Jupiter or Mars or Saturn, what do people usually experience in those situations?
Well, it's typically so a Neptune contact would naturally last about a year or a year and a half, just because of the principle, the initial contact, and then the retrogradation, and then the third pass by, or the fifth pass by.
Right.
That can happen. So typically, Neptune Neptune dissolves whatever it contacts. Again, I would say that would be the principle. Now, of course, it's impossible to dissolve another planet, but that's the to contrast that with Uranus, everything is, you're just skipping down the garden path, and then shazam, something happens out of the blue. Neptune has a really different morphing effect, but so typically dissolves whatever it contacts, which, and by the end of that, you can emerge as something different. But again, and the general principle here is associated with Neptune crossing over an inner planet is particularly gnarly. Now, gnarly is not a term that's used in the ancient Shastras, but
inauspicious.
Well, inauspicious. Well, I'll think about that term later. I have some issues with these things of determining what is good and what is bad. I don't even think that way, but let's say that having Neptune cross over anything requires boundaries. Neptune is the planet of boundlessness. So if there's no boundaries between you and the divine, yay. But if there's no boundaries between you and other people that are encroaching on you, then the danger is obvious there. So it requires extra spiritual practice. The only way to deal with Neptune is to immediately go into higher states of consciousness. I use that as your immediate approach. Praying, fasting, chanting, mantras, creative visualization, praying, that sort of thing. Because this is really very complex. There's tendency to be gaslit, or you're gaslighting yourself. Illusion, delusion, confusion, deception, self-deception, victimization, etc. Hopeless causes. So if Neptune, let's say Neptune is crossing over your moon, there's always going to be psychological advantages to this. A person may suffer so much that it drives them into a really dedicated course of spiritual practice, because they're just world weary or major disappointment and disillusion. When Neptune shows up, you are disillusioned. Now, it just so happens that Neptune, a fourth house aspect from Neptune or a 10th house aspect from Neptune, often coincides with an opposition from Uranus. When Uranus is opposite Uranus, it can also be that Neptune is squaring its own placement.
Okay.
So that, and again, early mid 40s. And so that is, I tell my clients that are going through, I said, this is a good thing. You're becoming disillusioned. Now you're going to find out how the world really works. There may be a sacrifice involved. There may be loss. There may be poignancy. But again, without adding too much of a philosophical tone there, but philosophy is important for addressing these things, because typically when people have adverse Neptune aspects, they are suffering. They don't know how to identify the problem. They can't solve the problem. It's they're in suspended animation. They're not focused, and that often leads to developing a more spiritual practice.
That's hope.
It is to be hoped, yes.
Good. And so then when we think about Pluto in that regard, Pluto hitting these planets based on, what we had discussed earlier, again, thinking like, well, it's just maybe Mars. When I think of Mars, I also think of Pluto as kind of having a similar energy. Is that more of an explosive kind of combination then?
Well, I would leave explosions to Uranus.
Okay.
But that would be more like a sort of a knife in the back or something.
Okay.
Because again, that's a little. Pluto is very subtle. Again, it's in certain ways. It can be really an overt bully in obvious ways, but Pluto is the great Pluto's the lord of the underworld. So just as a concept here. So what, your own personal underworld? Yes. People that you're dealing with in the outside world? Also yes.
Mm-hmm.
But just to use your example, Pluto to Mars would say that could be at the end of, again, if we're confining ourselves to talk about the effects of transits, if we're talking about transiting Pluto conjunct Mars, well, that's when you use your, that's an epic battle for self mastery. Pluto's also the planet of self mastery. But I didn't mention that earlier, but it is. Because the external demons are functioning as a projection of internal demons, and there is the concept of also when Pluto is prominent, there's the concept of purging and purification. Again, going back to the psychic root canal analogy that I gave you last time we spoke, that there's confronting confronting your own way of working through the world. If Mars is a karaka of your tools and weapons, let's say, hope there's no weapons involved, but tools, your skill set. There's, you have to really up your game. If Pluto's anywhere nearby, upping your game to, there's a real advantage in knowing when Pluto is prominent, so that you understand what these, as again previously mentioned, these raging hormones are about. But Pluto can be, Pluto can be really obsessive and compulsive as well. So Pluto crossing over your Mars, you could take offense at the smallest infraction of, or take offense at anything. That's one practical bit of information I give to my clients when they're under the influence of Pluto, is to remember that you can choose not to be offended.
So does Pluto also give a little bit more sensitivity in some way? I wouldn't necessarily think Pluto is sensitive, but it sounds like what you're saying, that could be kind of the case.
Well, if we could, that's a good question, Brian. If we associate hypervigilance with sensitivity, I'm thinking I would associate sensitivity more with Neptune, that just feels things. But that term hypervigilance, where somebody is looking for a problem.
Yeah.
The one tiny thing could be off, and that would be what they focus on.
Right.
So hypervigilance, yes, that is when Pluto is prominent in anybody's chart. Excuse me. Hypervigilance, again, that's being defined as intentionally looking for a problem.
Right.
Pluto likes to stir the pot. They like to have the drama and the trauma without necessarily solving it.
Yeah, that's good. You bring up a question that we hadn't really talked about, but I think it might be useful for people. When you say like Pluto or one of the outer planets is prominent in the chart, do you mean like it's on an angle? Is it with the Atmakarka? Is it with the ruler of the first house? How would you sort of pull that out, that it's prominent in someone's chart?
Yes, any of those examples would apply.
Okay.
On an angle, with any inner planet.
With any inner planet. Okay.
Or oppressing any, basically inner planets. Because the outer planets are big boys. They can, not the outer planets. The superior,
beyond the asteroid belts. Yeah.
Beyond the asteroid, but those guys can, they can deal better with the influence of Pluto. But there's a real imbalance of power if Pluto's with Mercury. That could be a good thing for a researcher, a very deep thinker, a pathologist, a double agent, an industrial spy, or somebody, or a psychologist, or a psychoanalyst, or a therapist of any sort. But as long as there's a specific application for any of these outer planets, then they operate nicely.
Oh, so it might be that if someone knows that they have this, then what could be helpful is for them to figure out a way to channel that, and then it might not necessarily be as bad.
Well, nothing's either bad or good.
Well, I've experienced some bad things. So
Well, yes, I got that. But, you have to look way down the road to see
yeah,
what that final
yeah, yeah.
what that
I know.
final outcome is.
Right.
I don't mean to go zen on you or anything, but a difficult coercion, birth and death. I mean, a death-like experience.
Yeah.
Oh yes, intensity, uh,
Mhm.
uh, exploitation. I mean, yeah, there's some serious problems associated with Pluto.
Right.
Um, I mean, if I see that in a person's chart and it's appropriate, I would ask the person if they were exploited when they, in an imbalance of power in some way. And they
Mhm.
almost always say yes. I mean, but I don't know if I went off track on that
No,
one.
no, you were staying with it, and to tie it in a little bit back to the question I had asked when we're thinking about whether they're prominent. You mentioned the inner
Oh,
planets,
oh yes.
and again, I just for the sake of people who are listening, it would be conjunctions and so on, but it could be, if like you've got Neptune in, I don't know, if you've got Neptune in the third house, and then you would look 10 houses away, or for the fourth aspect and so on. If there was a natal planet somewhere in there, would that also give it, or not?
No, not. I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, yes, okay, it might, but you could get similar information from from another combination, I think.
Okay.
Um, again, my approach I mean, I've been looking at charts for a very long time, is to just keep it as simple as I can.
Got it.
And,
Okay.
and so, I know that in Jyotish, we really like to identify the strengths of the planets and the house lordships and all that sort of thing, but I don't think that necessarily applies to the outer planets. Yes,
Right.
whatever house one of these planets falls in, there's a specific anomaly there that which is a theme throughout the lifetime. But I think mainly the hard aspects, or the so-called hard aspects, the fourth house, 10th house, um, but a ninth house aspect from an outer planet, I wouldn't mention that at all. I mean,
Okay. Okay. Okay.
there's plenty more to talk about, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. And with a little bit of time we have left, I know there's a lot to talk about. And again, I remember taking that class with you at the Sedona Astrology Conference, and so I'm sure you could say a whole lot more. But with the limited time we have left, I'm kind of curious about how these outer planets affect a person's capacity for a relationship. Like, are you looking at these outer planets related to the seventh house and ninth house, or seventh house and ninth lords, or what do you look at to see how these might impact a person's ability to, be successful in a relationship?
Well, okay, that's a good question, and that's excuse me, a whole another discussion. But the short version of that could be that I would simply look to see if there's one of those three planets in the seventh house.
Okay.
I wouldn't point this toward the ninth house.
Okay.
But again, Neptune. So, for instance, we'll do it in our proper order.
Yeah.
If Uranus is in the seventh house of relationships, that means that a person is really is more a candidate for a non-traditional type of relationship, where they can also maintain their personal freedom within the relationship. It would be good if they could marry somebody that turns out to be their best friend and could accommodate their idiosyncratic behavior or their eccentricities, because that's the nature of Uranus.
Right.
But I have to say that since Uranus is the planet of divorce, when it falls in the seventh house, then well, then again, their partner should have a sense of humor to deal with this. Uh, but um, um, so again, Uranus is the planet of disruptions, or it would be ideal if, again, the short version there, a non-traditional relationship.
Right.
Somebody lives on the East Coast, somebody lives on the West Coast, somebody works the day shift, somebody works the night shift, or whatever, any kind of whatever anomaly that you could point to there.
Right.
Now, if Neptune is in the seventh house, that's a different story. Neptune in the seventh house says that the person is really subject to the projections of their own projections. They're projecting onto their partner something that may or may not be there. But a little more in a little more practical way, typically a Neptune in the seventh house is associated with attracting a partner, a handicapped partner. What kind of handicap? Any mental, substance abuse issues that they can rescue. They have a rescuing complex. Or also associated with that, I hope you don't freak out, but that's the Madonna whore complex too.
Okay.
Or they're going to take the fallen flower or the fallen pine cone or something and rehabilitate them and make them into their own image. That very rarely works.
So is it codependent as well then? I mean, is that kind of a similar? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it is, because again, wherever Neptune is in a person's chart, that's their Achilles heel.
Okay.
That is their weak point. It's got to fall somewhere in one of those 12 placements.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's great. So when we're thinking about Neptune in the seventh, a person, would you say that, let's say you're doing like a compatibility and you see that one of these people has Neptune in the seventh, how do you describe that to them? How do you say, well, you might not, well, what would you say? That's the question.
Very carefully.
Yeah.
Well, you got to put the most positive spin on it. My experience with dealing with people that come to me for synastry or compatibility is they're going to do whatever they're going to do anyway. Okay? Right. They're going to do this anyway. They just want me to confirm something.
Yeah.
But I would. You just got to do what you got to do. But I would point that out, that the person with Neptune in the seventh house would have to be aware that they are of not sacrificing themselves for the sake of what may or may not be there in the relationship. Right.
Yeah. And so when you think about Pluto then, and again, Pluto in the seventh house, I mean, does that even really work?
Does it work? Well, depends on who you talk to.
Okay.
Well, excuse me. The dangers of Pluto in the seventh house are associated with a real imbalance in power, or roles and responsibilities. Now, that probably sounds like a fairly unromantic sort of a scenario there. I mean, imbalance of power. Well, we're talking about relationships. But again, since it's the nature of power to be fairly heavy-handed, that could be a person that is set up to give their power away to another person. And it's very complex, because the person, again, there's the sort of the potential partner for someone with Pluto in the seventh house. The potential partner could misrepresent themselves intentionally, right? For issues of, I mean, there could be some financial complications associated with that too. Right. But that does have to do with coercion and obsession and compulsion and being maybe hypersexualized in a certain way. It wouldn't be a marriage between equals. It would be, there would be some other hormonal motivation, perhaps. Right. Okay, excellent. Yeah, well, I know that there's a lot more that could be said on these outer planets, but I do appreciate you taking the time to kind of give a survey for people. So thank you for that. Well, it's my honor and my pleasure, Ryan. Yeah. And if people wanted to get in touch with you and contact you, what is the best way to do that? Well, my website is my name. It's www.charlottebenson.com. Okay. Not terribly imaginative, but that'll do the trick. Okay. But also, I think that your listeners know that I'm the president of the American College of Vedic Astrology. So yes. That's www.acvaonline.org. Yeah, I'll put those down in the description section so people can find that. But again, I want to thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciated it. Ryan, it was my pleasure. Thank you for allowing me. You're welcome, and take care.